So much of the challenge of making good visualization is deciding what details matter for the user and what details they can safely ignore. So you're trying to tell a story. There are key ideas here that the viewer, the reader, the user definitely needs to understand. And there are plenty of things that they actually need to ignore in order to get at those bigger facts. Like if you include all the details, it's just overwhelming and distracting. And so much of what we're trying to do here is figure out how do we skillfully or artfully exclude differences that are just going to distract the reader or the viewer from the message we're trying to convey. So Tableau and most visualization packages give us lots of ways to do this, so that we have things like aggregation, we have things like groups, we have things like hierarchies, we have things like level of detail expressions. In this particular video, we're going to be talking about that groups one. So how do we actually take categorical variables that may have many categories and group like categories in order to emphasize the differences that matter and de-emphasize or completely erase the differences that don't matter in order to guide the user into a particular view of the data set. So let's start our new sheet and let's think here about sales over time by genre. So is it the case that, for instance, like romance books sell more at certain times of the year and not at other times of the year, or science fiction or children's books? Or do children's books sell more right before Christmas? Or Let's think about this. So what we want is the sales count as our rows, and we want the sales date as our columns. And again, this is just a single data point because right now we're displaying the year, but let's break this all the way down to, and let's do it the wrong way and then the right way. Let's break it down by day. So this is for all books, but I said we're going to be thinking about genre here. So imagine you're like a brand manager and you're trying to figure out, should I launch this science fiction book at a particular time of year in order to increase sales? Should I hold off? Does it matter? Do I have to time these things? How do I optimize the launches of all the books in my portfolio to maximize sales? Like, what do I do? Well, we have to start by getting some data. So let's go up to book, and inside book we have genre, and let's drag genre to color. So this is going to split it out, and so purple is science fiction, for instance, red is memoir, and the reason I said let's do this wrong before we do it right is because clearly this is just a complete train wreck. Like, what is anyone supposed to understand about this particular graph? We need to change the level of detail here. This is too much. It's too much for a user to understand. We have to do something different here. There's just way too much going on. So let's first bring it down to month. Okay, so I went here and instead of giving me every day, just give me the months. So this is a much more perhaps appropriate level of detail. And again, as a brand manager, like, do you care if it's launched on the 1st or the 15th? Maybe yes, maybe no, but you also care about whether it's launched in February versus July. And this is really saying that there's a huge difference between February and between July. So I want to do one more thing. Notice that these things change so much. I really can't tell if, like, proportionally right now, mystery is selling more than it did here. Is it the same percentage that it was? Because we really care about percentage, right? Is it accounting for more of the total market share right now, or is it accounting for less? And so the way I can do this is if I click the little arrow next to count sales and I say quick table calculation, I want percentage of total. And notice what happens here. My axis here is now is in terms of percent, but this isn't quite right. This is percent going across the data set. What we want is across a particular part of time. So another way of saying this is when we are making our table calculation, we want to compute using the table down, not the table across. So it's not like over time that we're taking the percentage, like the percentage of over the year. We want for a given point in the year, how much of this of the total does this particular genre account for? So rather than the table across in time, we want to go at a given time across going down, or table using down, just one point in time, just this point in time. So if we change this, notice what happens. If we were to add all of these portions up, we would get 100%. So like 30% of, in this case, 38% of sales in August are science fiction, 17%, 16.5% are mystery, and so on all the way down the line. So the thing here, so this is where our groups come in, is that maybe there are not differences really between some of these things. So like for instance, we have science fiction and fantasy, but is that really so different than young adult? And is that really so different than fiction? Maybe yes and maybe no. Again, it depends what the particular story you're telling is. Maybe you want to operate on that level of granularity, or perhaps like if this data set were richer, you would want to break it down even more, like even down to a lower level. It's not just science fiction and fantasy, it's science fiction here and fantasy here. But in this case, let's imagine we wanted to go up a level of detail, something coarser, and where we're just dealing with fiction and nonfiction, and that's it. So let's try this. So let's select the fiction. So we've got children's, let's call that fiction. We have fiction, we have mystery, we have romance, we have science fiction, and we have young adult. All of these together compose fiction. These are all together our fictions. And so let's right click here and say group. Notice what happens when I group them. They all get piled into one group, and now they just have one trace. And then let's do the same thing here. Let's do memoir and nonfiction. We select them together. And by the way, when I'm selecting it, that is if you hold Control and click on Windows, or Apple, the Open Apple or Command button on Mac while you're clicking, it will do like individual, this one, and then this one added in, and then this one added in. So I'm going to go ahead and say right click, group. Beautiful. And now notice what's happened here. I only have two left. They're both genre, but now it's grouped. And notice I have a new variable over here, which has this little paperclip symbol, which means I've kind of clipped different categories together. Let's go ahead and say, click the little triangle and say edit group. And this gives us, just to clean it up, right? So let's keep genre group the same, but let's rename this level. So this isn't like children's fiction. This is kind of clunky, right? Let's just call this fiction. And this really isn't like memoir nonfiction. That's a little clunky too. Let's just call this nonfiction. And when we hit OK, this trickles down. And now we have a nice, clean visualization that shows us that altogether, fiction comprises almost all of our sales. And that does not vary at all, or very, 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 very small amount, right? We dip from 98% total sales in fiction in November to 95. So we have a 3% downtick and a corresponding 3% uptick from just under 2% in November to just under 5% in December for nonfiction. So there might be some small tick in nonfiction sales right before Christmas, for instance. Maybe these are gifts or something. We would obviously have to do more user research to figure out what's going on there. But the point being is that we've allowed ourselves to answer two questions that we couldn't see before. When we had this more granular level of detail with all of these time series bebopping around all over time, we couldn't really tell what was going on. There was too much detail going on. It was too hard to say, is our portfolio of sales changing from fiction to nonfiction over the course of the year? Yes or no. By grouping these things together, we've actually taken away detail, which seems like a bad thing, but in fact it made it easier to answer the question by saying that no, there's no difference. The portfolio does not really change over the course of the year, except maybe for a small tick at the end. This is what I'm saying, is that it's very counterintuitive. You would really think that the more data you can get in there, the better off you'll be. And sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's just flat out wrong. We actually want to remove detail skillfully, artfully, selectively, so that we can guide the user towards a particular interpretation of the data we're trying to present.